Perfect. Okay, well, Kira, good evening. Welcome to episode 24 of New Zealand Free Speech Radio, broadcasting live every at 6 p.m. every Thursday at t.me/NZ Free Speech. I'm your host, Steve Dalton, and tonight we're speaking with special guest Stephen Berry from the Mr. Berry Show. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thanks very much for having me and for your patience.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we had a delay, but that's no problem, and at least we got you here in the end, and I'm really been looking forward to speaking with you because there's a lot to talk about, and especially in different areas since we both are broadcasting online, kind of in an independent way. And so I guess we'll just start about tell us a bit about yourself and about your background.
So I'm living in Australia now. I moved across about 3 months ago. Prior to that, I was in New Zealand politics, a good half of my life, actually. I first ran for Parliament when I was 19, back in 2002, and I ran for the Auckland Mayoralty in 2004 and a couple of other minor things which I never had a chance at, but came third place running for Mayor of Auckland in 2013, created a party called Affordable Auckland, which was all about bringing the role of council down to the very basics, the rubbish, the roads, that sort of thing, not all the nonsense and the social engineering that they do these days. And then after that, joined the ACT Party, and I was an ACT Party candidate in 2014, 2017, and in the Northcote by-election in 2018. But retired from politics about halfway through last year for health reasons. And yeah, so I guess I'm officially retired from politics, but I can't stop sticking my nose into it.
Yeah, fair enough. And I know what you mean. I mean, I'm relatively new to the space, and it does get addicting in a way, and it's entertaining as well. And I enjoy your show as well because it is entertaining as well, and there is this element of a newsreader as well as a commentator, which I enjoy, and I'm sure many others enjoy as well. So yeah, that's interesting history. And so what like was it right at the start, would you say, that got you interested in, and what made you want to run for Parliament at such a young age?
I first took an interest in it watching the 1993 election, so I was about 10 years old then. And I don't know what aspect of it was, but it was just watching that election night coverage, which I found fascinating, and then it just went from there, really. And you can imagine I annoyed my family and what few friends you have when you're a 10-year-old who's interested in politics. I was always, I guess, coming from a National Party household, I was always going to come up on the centre right, though I discovered the ACT Party in about 1996. And so I guess once I came across them and learned a bit more about what they stood for, I was always in the kind of libertarian side of politics. Though after I ran in 2002, unfortunately, I discovered the Libertarians Party, and that promptly destroyed my prospects for getting into Parliament for a good decade or so. So if anyone wants to be a politician, stay away from the party. Like that.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. Yeah, it's that's I want to make a few comments there, but could I just start? Could you please mute the channel, the New Zealand Free Speech channel, just because it's the notifications are coming up on the audio.
Oh yeah, sure.
So you could just click on up the top.
There we go.
New Zealand Free Speech.
Yeah.
Awesome, yeah. So I just shared Stephen's the notification still came through, but did you mute it at the top? If you click that and then it says notifications, and you just click the no notifications button.
When I'm muting it, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, not this. Not mute the chat. Sorry, not mute this discussion. But if you go to the actual Telegram page and and click on New Zealand Free Speech on the channel. It should come up there. So I just shared Stephen Berry's YouTube channel on the chat for anyone that's interested. We had someone was asking for it, so yeah, really would recommend. It's some really high quality stuff, and I want to talk about later on. I guess the Free Media Network that I'm trying to work on, which you have been added to. I'm not sure if I think I did tell you maybe a while ago that I'd added you to that network. But I guess I want to comment on you talked about something about something about libertarianism and why you stopped being in politics.
Yeah, sorry. In the respect that joining the Libertarians Party absolutely destroyed any possibility there was for success in politics for a long time.
What do you mean there? Is it just because of... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so I was the deputy leader from 2003 to 2004, but the fact is that what the Libertarians advocated for was never going to have any sort of appeal to New Zealand voters, and was never going to make any sort of impact. But being a bit young and new to it, I thought I could do otherwise. So if there's people that actually want to make a career out of politics, I think my first advice would be don't go for micro parties, because it ain't going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. So is that Libertarian Party, was that separate from ACT, was it?
Yeah, it was. It was founded by Lindsay Perigo. Actually, it ran in the 1996 election as well. The best it ever did was 1999, when they got 0.3% of the vote. So that was their pinnacle.
Interesting. And so what was you did mention the ACT Party, so what was your involvement with them?
So I kind of went in and out of ACT. I mean, I joined them before the 2002 election, but wanted to run as an independent just to give it a crack. But then after the 2002 election, I discovered the Libertarians Party and never went back to ACT for about another decade. And I kind of saw ACT as these weak and unprincipled people. But eventually accepted the reality of politics, which is at some stage you've got to find you're essentially selling a product to people, and if I were to put that into a retail sense, there's no point having the most high quality gourmet supermarket in the poorest part of South Auckland, because it doesn't matter how good it is, nobody's going to buy it. And politics is a bit like that in a sense too. You've got to sell policies to the electorate, and for them to have any sort of impact, they've got to be something that people are willing to buy and therefore vote for.
Yeah, for sure. And so I'm interested in, I guess, your perspective of the current ACT Party, because I mean, they relatively are the Libertarian Party of New Zealand. A lot of people get them confused for a Conservative Party, which I think maybe I can see why people can think that. But what do you think about the modern ACT Party and things they're doing right, things they're doing wrong?
Well, yeah, they've never been a Libertarian Party, strictly speaking. I used to say it was a Libertarian Party with Conservative members in a sense. Most of the politicians and the people in the top positions are classical liberals or libertarians, but the membership base is largely conservative. Most of what they're doing now, I think, is great in the sense that it makes the state smaller. It aims to reduce taxes and regulations. What I would say is the exception to that is probably some of their statements on gangs at the moment, which I think is going too far in terms of it's almost like hate speech in a way, because if we decide we're going to ban gangs, well, who defines the gangs? So the ACT Party's got excellent policies on hate speech and freedom of speech, because it understands that the problem with that legislation is defining hate speech, yet the mistake they're making in relation to gangs is almost, pardon me, almost the same as what the government's doing with speech, because how do we define what a gang is, and then how do we identify which of these people we're going to take their civil liberties from simply because they belong to an arbitrary organisation? So that's probably the one thing that I think ACT's making a mistake on. They've bought into this populism on smashing gangs, and I completely get it. I mean, what the Mongrel Mob and Black Power, etc., are horrendous, and I'd love to see them scrapped. But I don't think the way they're going about it is the right way, because if you've got that power for politicians in respect to these particular organisations, who's to say that that couldn't be applied to other organisations which aren't gangs?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think with any increase in government power, you do have to ask those questions: where can it be applied to, not just in this particular case. However, I do see a possible future in New Zealand where gangs do get so extreme where maybe it is in the best interest of the country to clamp down hard on them. And I guess in that situation, what's the problem? Where could it go wrong if we say, for example, okay, gangs, it's illegal to be in a gang. So in a gang is defined as a criminal organization that is openly identifying it themselves, like the Mongrel Mob with the patches, and we know that the Mongrel Mob are a criminal gang because they engage in criminal activity, and so therefore it's illegal to wear a gang patch, it's illegal to be part of the Mongrel Mob, and then create incentives for members to leave and disassociate with the gang. Where can things go wrong in terms of that situation?
Maybe if we think about, you may have heard of Dr. Green, who's a very long time cannabis activist. And a few years ago, he had a building called the Dactory in New Lynn. And that Dactory was openly selling cannabis or providing cannabis to adults and providing a venue to adults where they could smoke cannabis. And he was arrested a number of times for cannabis supply. Now, you could argue that based on that, himself and the Dactory and anybody associated with it was a criminal gang, when that's not necessarily the case. And in his case, he's actually a cannabis legalization advocate rather than a genuine criminal.
How does that relate to the gangs?
Well, it could have been possible that it was decided Dr. Green and the Dactory was in a criminal gang because he was providing a venue to supply cannabis, and that was part of his cannabis legalization activism.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to Lee Williams. So I want to ask you. I just watched your most recent broadcast. Lee Williams, is he the canary in the coal mine?
He's a difficult one because his tactics are so over the top and offensive, and his message is it's lunacy. And so he does make it very difficult to defend his freedom of speech. What's happened to him? So, I mean, there's a freedom of speech issue, but freedom of speech, it doesn't exist in a vacuum in a free society without freedom of association. So the right to engage with people you want to and not engage with people you don't want to, and property rights. I can't come into your house and call you a rude word and say that's my freedom of speech. You have every right to kick me out of your house. So we've always got to remember those two aspects of a free society as well. So what happened to Lee Williams is that he had done a number of YouTube videos for a couple of years. What he talks about is conspiracy theory nonsense as far as I'm concerned. I mean, examples would be he claims that Jacinda Ardern is deliberately importing tens of thousands of Muslims to replace New Zealanders in New Zealand. And I mean, that's just ridiculous. I understand that the reason he got fired from his workplace is because he was wearing work uniform in some of those videos. Some people have told me that wasn't the case, but other people have told me they was, and I really don't know because the videos have been since deleted on YouTube. So if you're going to wear your work uniform when you're doing a video on social media, then you shouldn't be surprised if your workplace fires you for doing that, because now you've tarnished their brand with your politics. So that was what the initial petition against him was, for Synlait, his employer, to fire him for allegedly being a
so
white
I'm just confused about this situation, because it's a really terrible situation. I think it's terrible for a few reasons. Is that this is really, I think, the first time in New Zealand, I think quite publicly, we're seeing someone persecuted quite heavily in different areas. I mean, in almost every single way that someone can be persecuted for something that they've said. I mean, so from what I understand is that the reason why this all started was because of a video that Lee Williams made about mocking the leader of the Maori Party. And
That's correct.
is that correct? So
yeah,
and then the petition. And so you did a good. I watched your latest episode, and you did quite a good overview of it. But I just want to confirm more things. So was it the Maori Party that then started that petition to get him fired?
I understand it was a couple of people off Twitter, Byron Clark and Anna McKenzie, who were actually the ones to start that off. Byron Clark was definitely, he's really led these persecutions of people on the right with opinions that he doesn't like. Another one would be Damien Dement, who's lost his YouTube channel. And I mean, the thing is, YouTube's private. It's private property. If YouTube doesn't want you on YouTube, then so be it. But at the same time, what's happened to Lee Williams, I think, is a bit extreme. So he hasn't just lost his YouTube channel; he's lost his job. His wife has left him, though maybe you can't blame the left for that. Westpac have taken away his bank account. Then he's tried to use crowdfunding sources to give him an income, and two of those crowdfunding organisations have cancelled his fundraising. Then he was trying to get donations via PayPal, and Byron Clark led on Twitter a campaign to have his PayPal cancelled. I'm not sure if that actually happened. So I mean, yeah, there's social sanction against someone with views you don't like, which is legitimate. But did they really need to go this far with Lee Williams? It's gotten to the stage where it's not just saying, hey, this guy's offensive and we don't like it. It's got to the stage where it's quite vindictive and nasty. And you're going to push people into a position where they've got nothing to lose as a result of these actions, and that could only go very badly as far as I can see.
Yeah, well, thanks for commenting on that. I mean, that's something that I really think that it's really maybe given David Seymour a bit of a puzzle, because he talks about standing up for free speech, yet here's a person that's clearly being persecuted in every possible way for his free speech. And it's giving, I think, a lot of hard questions for these people that talk about libertarianism and freedom, when we make excuses for, like, I can't believe the argument that, and you yourself, mate, I want to question you on that, about how Westpac, a bank, it's free to disassociate with Lee Williams because it's a private company. Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's part of the argument. But then the second part of the argument is banking is, you could argue, is an essential service for modern life, and if you can't receive money or spend money, which is what you need to do to eat, is that going too far?
I think in terms of should they be allowed to do it, they should be allowed to do it. Is it something that I would advocate or try or call upon them to do to other people? No. And I mean, when you're a libertarian, you're constantly in a situation where you'll say, yes, someone should be able to do this thing, whether it's using drugs or any number of things that most people generally find offensive. You find yourself in the position of saying they should be able to do it, even though I don't like it. And I guess Twitter would be a great example of what happened to me. I was caught up in the big purge of so-called far-right Twitter accounts in January of this year. I lost my Twitter account, and I think it was a real dick move by Twitter to take away my account, but it is their private property.
Yeah, okay, well, great. Well, so we've got a few questions from the audience. We'll just quickly go through them. So we've got Dave Menzies is raising his hand, and also I've got another one from Smangy. I guess we'll just do the first one that came in, which was from Smangy. So he or she asks, could you please, do you have an opinion on the He Puapua report?
Yeah, I think it's going to be incredibly destructive for New Zealand. It's just essentially, it's really an extension of the social justice warrior culture wars that have extended from the United States about a decade ago, and now they're basically all around the world. And I think this is only going to be absolutely destructive in New Zealand. There's not going to be any racial harmony created as a result of it. It's just going to create resentment and bitterness, and I can only see New Zealand society becoming more fractured as a result of this.
Sweet.
I
Okay.
also don't think what He Puapua is trying to do is legitimate. But I also think it's worth pointing out that He Puapua is the result of the United Nations Agreement on Indigenous Rights. I won't have that title quite correct, but and I think it's worth pointing out that the United Nations Compact on Migration, like this one on Indigenous rights, is a so-called non-binding agreement. And before the mosque shootings, it's really shut down the discussion on this issue. I was publicly opposed to the United Nations Migration Compact, and it's interesting to see what's happening with the Indigenous Rights Agreement, because it's got all the same hallmarks. And I tell you what, give it about 5 to 10 years, we're going to have another issue with governments in the future aspiring to comply with the United Nations Migration Compact, and that's just going to be just as divisive.
Interesting. Well, thanks for commenting on that. And I guess I do want to ask a follow-up question on that. How does it point to the constitutionality and law of New Zealand if an elected government can come in and change the government?
Well, we don't really have a constitution in New Zealand. There's very little controls on our government. We've only got one. We're a unicameral legislature, so there's no upper house or anything like that. And as long as any changes in law go through the 3 readings, then it just needs to get approved by the Governor General. So checks and balances there's very few of. In terms of the United Nations agreements, that doesn't even need to go through a vote in Parliament because they're non-binding. But the problem with these non-binding agreements is that they're still aspirational, and over time you will find that MPs in the House desire to pass laws which match with those agreements later on.
Interesting. Okay, and I just would you say that we kind of have a constitution through precedent? Like, there's no government that's maybe come in and done this, and so there's an implied precedent, as well as.
No. If you have a look at the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, and every 5 years, the United Nations Human Rights Commission will review countries' performances in regards to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, that's another non-binding agreement, but every 5 years we're still assessed against our compliance on it and given a list of things which we need to do to improve our performance in complying with that agreement. So it's the Indigenous rights one doesn't set a precedent. That precedent was set long ago with in effect joining the United Nations and signing that Human Rights Declaration.
Interesting. Okay, well, so I'll just give Dave Menzies a chance just to ask you a question. He had his hand raised. So I'll just unmute you for a little bit, Dave, and you can ask your question, and then I'll mute you again. So here we are. You're unmuted now, Dave.
Hi, Dave. Hi.
Okay, so it looks like Dave didn't speak. So that's feel free to anyone can ask any questions just by typing in the chat as well. I'll ask it out. So another one that came out. Oh, sorry. Here we are. Here's Dave.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Right. Okay. Good. No, I guess these are just points. I'll try and be quick, not to take up everyone else's time. But Debbie Narewa-Packer was the one that started that petition. Just to clear that up. There's a post been snapped from the petition, and she changed it a little bit later. So she definitely started it. So the argument that she was, I mean, I heard David Seymour the other day when Lee was speaking to him, or when they were shouting at each other, say that Debbie Narewa-Packer was doing that outside of her role as an MP. Now, I don't really see how such a political move can be seen as being taken outside her role as an MP, especially when she is associating what Lee has done with his role as a worker at Synlait. So that's just a point. The other thing about Lee wearing his work uniform, well, I mean, I've done quite a lot of videos with Lee, and I was probably one of his best friends here before he left. And there isn't a video in which he's wearing his work uniform. There may be some PPE in one or two videos, but certainly nothing that can identify Synlait. So, and I think it's probably fair to say that the video that that attracted all the attention to him, like bees to a honey pot from the left, was the one where he satired Rawiri. I think that's the one where he was doing a mock Maori accent. Waruri Waititi, I think his name is. And I think he was satiring the way that he stood up in Parliament, and I think that's the one really that got him. I'll just say this one couple of things actually, just on the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. There were a couple of videos I did on my channel 174M before it got taken down. They're still up there. I think Cole Bromley might have one of my videos.
Do you have a question? Do you have a question, Dave, for Stephen?
Well, here's a question, I suppose. You've just mentioned the UN Compact, and maybe about a year and a half ago, I was standing in front of David Seymour, and he said to me when I asked him about it and about the threats to free speech and media freedom in that. You'll remember that he said, "Oh, for fuck's sake, if that's your biggest problem in life, then I want your life." So, given that the Crown Law Office issued a letter that clearly said that could be, the compact could be used to create precedent and could come into law, and bearing in mind what you've just said about the UN DRIP and the UN Compact, do you think David was wrong to say that to me? Thanks.
Yeah, no worries, Dave. Thank you for pointing out about Lee wearing his uniform, because I mean, that to me that was the key determinant of whether there's grounds for him to be dismissed from his job or not. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. In terms of what your interaction with David, I did hear about that. My understanding was that you wanted for that to be the number one policy for ACT. I don't know if that's correct or not. And so David certainly wasn't going to do that. But yeah, I think probably as a result of the mosque shootings, it's become absolute political poison, and that's probably what motivated David. I can't say that I agree with what he did there, but considering how politics works, I'm also not that surprised that he's done it.
Yeah, sorry, no, I had no interest in making that the number one ACT policy. My question to him on the day was, are you going to remove New Zealand's signature from that, given that you are a libertarian and given the threats to free speech and to the media that are in that? My main concern has always been free speech. That's been my number one thing. I mean, if you saw the videos that I did and the speeches that I've done in the square here in Christchurch, it's always been free speech, and it's the threats to free speech in the compact that interested me most. It's just a shame that it's obviously its underlying ethos is about migration. It's not even about refugees. So it allows anybody who sees that you're against it to paint you as a racist, which I wasn't. But also David did seem to see it as a radioactive issue on the night, and he just chose to react angrily, and that was very disappointing, and made me think that, well, you know, you talk a good free speech game, but you don't seem to walk that talk.
Yeah, I can't say that I necessarily agree with what. Sorry, how do I phrase this? I don't necessarily agree with trying to talk down the danger of the UN Migration Compact. At the same time, it's also a non-binding document, so you can see why when some people are saying, look, this is a concrete risk to our freedoms, and it's such a politically explosive document as a result of the mosque shootings. I can see why David took the path he did, and it's just unfortunate that the fact that it's become such untouchable dynamite that all parties have had to go down that path. But I'm also sure that in the future it will become just as dangerous to our liberties as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People has. It's a bloody hard as a result of the mosque shootings.
Thanks for that, Stephen, and thank you for the questions, Dave. You can get another chance to speak at the later on if you like. I'm not really sure how to manage people coming up at the moment, so feel free to stand, because I will let you come up and talk to Stephen a bit more if you like. So thank you for that. So interesting comments there. So there's another comment for you, Stephen, from PB12, asks, please comment about David Seymour's response to Lee Williams when David was confronted. And then, quote, there are consequences to free speech, end quote, true, but visual anti-consequences, question mark.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same as what I was saying earlier, that in a sense, cancel culture is a way that free speech self-regulates. You may recall in the 2017 election campaign, I caused a bit of a stink because at a LGBT debate, Grant Robertson had got up and said that Labor was going to introduce hate speech laws. And I got up straight after him and said, look, free speech is the foundation of a free society. People like Brian Tamaki, he's a scumbag piece of shit, but he's got the right to his shitty views, and we've got the right to tell him how shitty they are. So cancel culture in that sense is the same as what I was talking about. Sorry?
I guess the question is emphasizing the vigilantiness, how they're targeting his livelihood. This is too far from, in my opinion, at least, and I think many people feel the same and are disappointed. And I mean, I'm personally disappointed in David Seymour for kind of repeating this the same stuff that the left says about there's consequences for free speech, which is what they use to limit free speech.
Yeah, well, there are consequences for free speech. It's just that the left is very hypocritical about this. In a sense, Lee Williams, Westpac is the is the Christian baker, and Lee Williams is the gay wedding cake. You've got the right to not associate with people if you don't wish to, and that's just as important as free speech in a free society. Again, does that mean that you ought to behave in that way to other people? And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you should be able to, if you wish to do, and other people should be able to condemn you or praise you for doing that. Because the alternative is, what laws do you want to put in place so that we can obligate people to engage with people that they don't want to? We've already got anti-discrimination laws, which I consider to be compelled association laws, which say there's these certain reasons why you cannot refuse to engage with people. I mean, a lot of them are quite reasonable: race, sex, sexuality, age. And you would think, well, if you're going to discriminate on those grounds, you're a jerk. But does that mean that the law should compel you to do it? And I would say no. And does the law actually stop it happening? No, people just lie about their reasons for doing it. So absolutely, I think a lot of the efforts that have been used against Lee Williams are reprehensible. I think they go too far. I think they create a real danger in our society if we're going to target people to that level, that they've got no options left and nothing to lose. But what sort of laws are you going to put in place as an alternative? And I think that's even more dangerous.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a matter of putting laws in place, but more a matter of enforcing the current laws. I mean, if you think about just the free speech law or freedom of expression, everyone has the right to free expression, including the freedom to seek, receive, impart information, and it goes on. Should it be? I mean, firstly, it should be illegal for a minister in Parliament to target a citizen, to target a campaign against the citizens in affecting his livelihood. It doesn't seem right to me. I mean, it seems like a breach of like a misuse of power, because politicians. I mean, David Seymour, he brought up this argument, which is not a strong argument. He talked about how there were 10,000 people that signed this petition to get you fired, talking to Lee Williams, and then he said, you might want to think about why that happened. But the reason why it happened was because a person with huge influence gathered his mob to do this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's morally the wrong thing to do in response to speech that you don't like. Though then again, the alternative is compelling association, which I think is even worse. So the alternative, if we look at Matthew Tukaki, him advocating the deportation of Williams for his views, I think that definitely crosses the line, because this isn't just freedom of association now. This is the government persecuting an individual for their laws. So I think that absolutely crosses the line. The Māori Party leader, she's not part of the government, so it's not something I've given a lot of thought to in that respect. My understanding was that the Māori Party hadn't started that petition. I'm certainly open to thinking about the reasons why it may be illegal or legal either way on that. But yeah, I wasn't actually aware that the Māori Party had started that. My understanding was it had been started by other people and then they had jumped on board.
Interesting. Well, thanks for your comments on that topic. Anyway, it's a big topic. I think it's quite important, and we might jump into that later on. But I guess just moving on for a moment. Yeah, and I guess this kind of relates to what we've been talking about. Why are we seeing a rise in woke supremacy in New Zealand?
I've always, well, for a long time, I thought that New Zealand's usually a few years behind the trends that we see from the rest of the world. I still remember in 2014, I was doing a candidate debate about tertiary education, and the question was on student loans, and I said, well, if you want to be able to pay off a student loan, maybe go and study something useful instead of gender studies. And that got a lot of laughs that night. Fast forward 3 years and it got a lot of boos. So at some stage between 2014 and 2017, we started catching up with the SJW culture in America. And I guess a lot of Western culture is in a sense Americanized, because it's in our movies and it's in our television, and a lot of the fashions and trends in the States do end up making their way here in New Zealand. So I suppose we're just really catching up with the rest of the world in regards to woke culture. Also, 20 years ago, we would used to talk about political correctness. So now we don't so much say politically correct, we say woke. And so maybe woke culture is actually just a more extreme form of something that was always there before.
Interesting. Yeah. It's almost seems like an evolution of political correctness and Marxism, perhaps. What are your thoughts on, I guess, the relationship between the woke culture and Marxism, and maybe the and socialism? Because this is a big question. So socialism and what's happening in New Zealand with the racial tension that we're seeing, and is this Marxist, socialist in origin or theme? Would you say?
Yeah, it's postmodern neo-Marxism. So often people will make the criticism, no, it's not Marxism, because Marxism doesn't has a narrative and postmodernism doesn't. But it's not actual Marxism; it's neo-Marxism. So therefore, it is a little bit different. But Marxism was based on group identity. It was economic group identity. So the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, and the wealthy. Neo-Marxism is the same pattern. It's all about group identity politics, but it's just different sorts of groups, and it's a much greater number of groups. It's still based on oppressor and victim, just as Marxism was based on bourgeoisie and proletariat. So yeah, it absolutely is. You could call it cultural Marxism, if you like. Whatever you want to call it, it's still group identity politics, just as socialism is. But it's been much more successful in terms of winning the hearts and minds of people in Western culture, whereas once communism became clear as a complete failure economically and socially, that was no longer fashionable to support, especially as it ended up being so authoritarian. So really, it's just been a bit of a sleight of hand, switching from old school Marxism to cultural Marxism.
Fascinating. Well, thank you for going through that. It's a big issue, and I've recently started a hashtag socialist free NZ campaign, because I really see that we're, as a country, really can easily fall down the path of perhaps South Africa, and I'm interested in what you think about the future of New Zealand and where we can go wrong if this doesn't continue to increase and the lynchings continue to happen.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. For several elections, I've always said if I would say if you don't get ACT into the government, we're going to have the most left-wing government since 1984, and every single election that's proven true. John Key's national government was to the left of Helen Clark's Labour government. Everything that he opposed while in opposition, he kept intact while in government, and then added more things like increasing benefits, expanding working for families, ran deficits for 6 or 7 years instead of reducing social spendings in response to the Christchurch earthquakes. And then after John Key's government, we've had the Labour New Zealand First coalition, which was absolutely more left-wing than that national government, and the current government is more left-wing again. So it's clear where the trends are going. But probably one of the most disturbing things is that on the Cato Institute publishes an annual measure of countries' economic freedom, and New Zealand is still in the top 3. So you think, Jesus, what's happening to the rest of the world if New Zealand, with all its faults, is still one of the most economically free countries in the world?
Fascinating. So what
will we go to South Africa? I'm not so sure, but we've got all the same tools in place that could see us go that way, especially in terms of compelled association / anti-discrimination laws, and what they would call positive discrimination in favour of ethnic minorities, and hate speech laws, because South Africa has all of those elements as well. Will we go like South Africa? I'm not sure, but we're not going. Our direction is not away from South Africa.
Yeah, well, I just see New Zealand almost like a bunch of matchsticks ready to be lit. We've got a growing gang population. The gang population is almost bigger than the police population, which I think should wake a few people. And and we've got a large population on the benefit and the dole. And what happens if 1 week's of dole payments doesn't get made for some, maybe a cyber attack or something? We're going to see crime escalate through the roof, and gun crime already is escalating. I just see that,
Yeah,
especially, sorry, and especially, and I'm interested in your comments on this, and it is a relatively controversial, but there is a theme that's told to Maoris, and I want to be clear that most Maori, the majority of Maori, just want to be and just want to get on with their lives, and they're just individuals and respectful people, but that work hard as well. But there's a common theme that's told to Maoris, and within Maoridom, that the white man came to New Zealand and stole their land, and so this narrative is fueling this new type of socialism where we see this whole, and it's not even necessarily Maori that are fueling it. It's more the left wing and the government that are manipulating and using Maori as tokens, and they're using this tokenism to say, hey, the original New Zealand is corrupt to the core. They stole their land, therefore we're stealing it back for them, and we're already seeing SNAs taking land off farmers and taking property, taking guns off farmers as well. And there's this big narratives, and they're all ripe for, I think, a very bad situation. So I'm interested in what you think about that. In my opinion, it's a bad situation, but you're interested in what you think about all that.
Yeah, that's a few different, a few separate issues brought into one. So yeah, it is quite complex. I mean, the SNAs, that's actually been put on hold, and it's Māori were one of the groups against that because it removed their property rights over land that they would be granted under the treaty settlement process. So of course, nobody listened to the farmers, but once Māori organisations did, the government listened. I don't like to use collective terms, and I could see that you were also trying to avoid doing so. So I don't think it's necessarily a racial thing as much as it is the political class of Māori, and they are using that oppressor victim narrative to give themselves political success. And when you've got a system of separate racial seats, it's very easy to do that. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's Māori necessarily, but I would say that there is a political class of people doing it, and of course that political class relies on the Māori seats as well as mainstream seats to be in Parliament. And I guess when we have a look at when Yugoslavia broke up in the 90s and became Bosnia and Croatia, etc., the United Nations initially set up their electoral system along racial terms, and what a surprise, all the nationalists and extremists got elected and there was conflict. So yeah, that's another element as well. We don't want to have our political system set up so that it feeds racial nationalism and extremism.
Yeah, and I think you brought up how perhaps if we're going quite far left, there could be a far right retaliation.
Yeah.
Is it something that you think that could happen?
Yes, absolutely, and it's only natural that it will. Will it be as large as the left? I don't think so. The far right has obviously been it's obviously much less fashionable these days, which is great because it's horrific. But identity, it's odd that if white people use identity politics, that's far right. But if anybody else uses identity politics, that's far left, because the right's about, the right could be considered about individualism and the left is about collectivism. So I don't know why we have a left and right identity politics, because identity politics is all the same. It's all about collective groups, arbitrary groups, individuals are conscripted into whatever identity group is convenient for that argument under their disgraceful ideology. And it's only natural that if identity politics grows in popularity amongst the left, then identity politics will be the response of the right. And there's no difference between left-wing and right-wing identity politics. Well, the only difference would be the identities. Other than that, it's all the same.
Sorry. Yeah, so that's actually really interesting. A point you brought up. I had a question here. I don't know where I was going to fit it in, but I think it fits in really well right here. So I want to ask you about Nazism and the relationship between Nazis and socialists, because, like many are aware, the Nazis called themselves the National. They had socialist was part of the name. So I want to ask you. I guess, sorry, a bit of context in terms of Nazis being commonly associated with the far right, and the far right it is correct that the far right does engage in identity politics, which I'm well aware of from what I've experienced, even just on this show, people that have joined. And so why is it that the left that is so heavily engaged in identity politics can't see that they share the same ideology as the Nazis, in a sense, that they hate so much, that they hate the Nazis, of course?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess you've got to be an idiot to be on the left anyway, so you're just arguing philosophy with idiots, so maybe it's as simple as that. But there is no... again, Nazism, socialism, communism, they're all the same collectivist ideas. The nationalism is just an identity group, it's a nationality. And the economics of National Socialism are absolutely left-wing. The only thing that you could consider right-wing about the way the Nazis ran the economy was that they privatized a lot of industries like armaments and that sort of thing. But then those privatized industries just service the government anyway during the military build-up. That the Nazis regulated prices, they regulated what your industry could be, they regulated what they could sell. They ran enormous deficit budgets all the way through peacetime. And so while it looks like they were successful initially, the reality is that the bottom was going to drop out of their government spending anyway. They got to the stage where they could no longer buy, say, armaments, etc., with Reichsmarks. They had to start giving IOUs out, and then businesses started using those government IOUs as a parallel economy. And then you look at education and health and social welfare. These were all things that largely didn't exist prior to the Nazis as well, and they were all implemented by the Nazis' public health campaigns. All of those things which we generally consider socialism and could often be mirrored on what happened in the United States during the Depression, or even New Zealand during the Depression, as socialist things. So why the left wants to disassociate themselves with Nazism is just comes down to ignorance, as far as I can tell, and it doesn't stand up to any sort of genuine consideration.
Interesting. Yeah, I see that a common theme. Even in general, New Zealand education, I don't think is up to scratch politically. Like we lack a lot of civil education. So I want to ask you about your political leanings, and you mentioned libertarianism a little bit. So yeah, what are your political leanings, would you say?
I guess I have softened a little bit in my libertarianism from when I was younger, though it's more of a case of what I care about and what I think can be achieved versus being a purist. If my life was almost over and I looked back and we still had a public healthcare system, but taxes were extremely low, I think I'd be satisfied with that. But yeah, on the whole, I still consider myself a libertarian, but probably not as purist as I was, say, 10, 15 years ago.
Interesting. Well, so I consider myself a conservative, and I am flexible in certain areas, and I think when I first started becoming politically minded, I did say, hey, look, I'm a libertarian. I believe all these things. But then I'm starting to I'm interested in having a discussion, and this is my next question. Really, is about libertarianism versus conservatism, and how which one is the best solution for increasing freedoms, and I think maybe a simple way that I'm interested in your perspective of is to maybe to frame it as conservatives are maybe more willing to use the government to enforce the rules of freedom, and libertarians aren't. Would that be something you'd say?
No, because I think conservatives probably don't. Conservatives probably have a more moderate view on what freedom is versus libertarians. I mean, when we were talking about free speech earlier, I can see that I'm probably just not agreeing with a lot of your audience, where they've said, well, what it sounds like we should, in regards to Lee Williams, that we should be putting laws in place against some of these things that have happened to him. And I said, well, some of the things that have happened to him are extremely shitty, but I don't think there should be laws to stop it. I think that would actually be worse. So we probably have different ideas on what freedom is and the extremes it should go to. Libertarians also aren't generally particularly concerned about the ends of their philosophy. They're more concerned about the means. So in terms of, if we had a 100% laissez-faire capitalist system, I wouldn't care whether it was beneficial for everyone or not. What I would care about is that we're free.
Interesting. So I'm interested in, so my kind of flavor of conservatism is that society works for a reason, and it works for, and mainly they can be summed up in terms of the list of basic human rights, and those rights, they all logically consistent within each other. They all complement each other, like free speech and freedom of association, for example, where you can just walk away from someone if you like what they're saying. And so that's kind of, I think we're seeing a big conservative movement that's in New Zealand. It's kind of underground relatively, but I think, and I'm interested in actually national. We're seeing national start to pick up on some of these conservative ideas, and but the one thing I just wanted to mention was that there is this new type of libertarianism or freedom seeking, which is part of the digital revolution. So I mean, even what we're doing right now, and actually this ties in with a few things that we have in common in terms of online broadcasting. So the digital revolution enabled people to share information, and we saw that most profoundly, I think, with the Trump election, where the mainstream medias were all saying he would lose, and the social medias all if people said whatever they wanted, and we saw this entire thing where I guess maybe that's not the best example, but my point is that I think we're going through a digital revolution, and that digital revolution is implying some values, some conservative and libertarian values on our social structures, and I guess if I can formulate that into a question, where do you see the media heading? So we've got traditional broadcast media that runs on government licensed airwaves, and we have online media like what we're participating in right now. Where do you see the trend?
Look, I mean, I think the internet's probably been the most libertarian thing we've had since the founding of the United States of America, and it's only going to continue going this way. Initially, there were issues with being able to monetize it, and monetizing something that's very important in the long term. But that's becoming less of an issue now. Piracy was a big problem when the internet initially became big as well. But now, the corporations and producers of music have found ways to adapt to that, and Spotify would be a fantastic example of that. So yeah, I can only see it continuing the way it is now. It's unfortunate what happened in terms of Stuff and NZME prior to Stuff being bought by one of their journalists for $1. It's now becoming, the old sort of media, printed media, is becoming less profitable to maintain in a crowded market, and you don't have the economies of scale, etc., which are necessary now. So, the government's also got a bit of the blame for the fact that old types of media can't survive any longer because their main aren't fit for purpose in this new environment as well. But in terms of television, I think it's quite disgraceful how the government is giving handouts to media companies, and it shouldn't be owning TVNZ either. If these things can't survive on their own 2 feet, then they should fall, and I suspect that will be the case as time goes on.
Yeah, we're seeing something quite shocking with the government influence in the media. Is really this whole monopoly on the narrative, and that's coming out in quite some ugly ways in terms of COVID-19 and not the incentive for sharing narratives that don't flatter the government. So, sorry, go. Did you want to say something?
No. Go ahead.
So yeah, I want to talk about this more because you're obviously a broadcaster. So what got you into broadcasting?
I guess I about a year, 18 months ago, the pressure of doing politics full time and holding down a full time job, well, it was too much. I had a mental breakdown, and my physical health was no good either as a result. So it got to the stage where I couldn't maintain both. So really, I was flipping a coin as to, am I going to go through this enormously stretched out election campaign and max out all my credit cards and everything I've got for the chance of being elected, when the fact is that I was in absolutely awful state mentally, or shall I throw it in and try and salvage what I can? And I had an interest in watching YouTube shows. I've also had an interest in comedy. I did actually have a go at doing stand-up comedy in New Zealand before I moved to Australia, which seemed to have been reasonably successful in the circumstances. So I guess I thought about combining the two into a new show, very much like, say, The Daily Show or that sort of thing. And it's been quite liberating to finally be able to say what I like and not worry about the impact that it might have on a party or getting my ass kicked by David Seymour or something like that for saying the wrong thing. So it's been quite liberating.
Fantastic, that's great. And while I definitely enjoy the show and I hope you continue to broadcast, I've recently been aware that you recently had your 1 year anniversary of broadcasting. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I really enjoy it myself as well. And so I started this just mainly because I was just really depressed about how the whole media system, the maybe like not so much the radio. I think the New Zealand radio media is not that bad, I think, but
Magic Talk and NZB are both quite good. ZB not so much these days, though.
Yeah, but we don't really have an oppositional media system in New Zealand, like they do in America, where they have Fox News, and in Australia, where they have Sky News. But here they seem to all parody each other.
Yeah, and some people say that media should not be biased; they should just be objective and report the news. I think that's nonsense, actually. I've got no issue with media being biased, and in the States and in Australia, we all know what the biases are, and we choose what we want based on that. The only issue with biased news is when it's funded by my taxes.
Yeah, interesting. And because the bias does have, like, let's say when you have one media that's leaning right and one media that's leaning left, it does give, if you look at both of them, it does bring around a type of objectivity, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I've got no issue with that as long as they're open about their biases, as they are in many other countries. The only thing that really spoils it, in my view, is the taxpayer funding. If you got rid of that, then there'd be no reason to be so outraged about it. And look at Magic Talk or News Talk ZB. There's no doubt that there's enormous bias on both of those channels, and everybody knows what the bias is of each host, and they make their listening choices accordingly.
Yeah. So I guess sorry, I think it's kind of pretty much. Oh yeah, why did you move to Australia?
What interests you in radio?
So no, why did you move to Australia? If you,
Oh,
I mean, if it's personal.
Well, I had decided I had enough of working for the supermarkets that I was working with at the time. COVID had made things very difficult for us as well. It took out my partner's job because he worked in tourism, and I finished with politics, and just in terms of getting my life back together and sorting out my mental health and everything, and it just seemed like, well, I've just about turned over every other part of my life, and my husband wanted to move to Australia as well, so there's no real reason for me to stay in New Zealand anymore, and so we just made the move. And God, I wish I'd done it a long time ago, to be honest. In terms of the wages and the cost of living, etc., it's really noticeably easier in Australia. The only downside is that the government is much more bureaucratic. I've been trying to sort out my taxes and my Medicare and the like today, and being bounced back from different people from different websites and organisations, and that's a little frustrating. So that's probably one thing that New Zealand's better at than Australia. But other than that, the day-to-day living here is much improved. I guess the only downside is the lockdown, and having changed countries, I'm now going through my 6th or 7th lockdown, depending on how you count it. So that's a bit crap. But other than that, I find Australia has been much better.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. So I had a guest a while ago that his recommendation for young New Zealanders was to just move to Australia, which I found interesting.
I couldn't agree more now.
And I'm surprised that Australia can be more bureaucratic than New Zealand. That must just be a nightmare.
Yeah, I guess that my experience with New Zealand is dealing with the bureaucrats. They genuinely want to do their best to make it as simple as possible for you. Australia, I haven't had enough experience yet to really work out if that's the case. What I have found is that they tend to beat their targets in terms of getting things back to you. Like, for example, getting into Medicare, which you have to do in order to see a doctor or anything like that, was meant to take 6 weeks and it took 4. I still think 4 weeks is crap, but they beat their targets, but their targets are ridiculous. But yeah, I have found it's a lot more difficult to navigate the bureaucracy here. But then again, that could just be me. Who knows? But other people I've spoken to in Australia kind of agree.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, so I'm just going to kind of wrap things up in terms of my questions, and then I'm interested in I'll unmute everyone, and there can just be a free for all. We can talk and stuff and whatever. I guess it's my last questions that I want to ask you on a one-to-one basis is what can we do to make things better in terms of countering this socialist influence?
Look, I mean, the ACT Party is not perfect. I've highlighted a couple of things that I disagree with. Your listeners have done the same. It could be better, but in comparison to every other option that is in New Zealand, the ACT Party is light speed ahead of any other party, whether they could get into Parliament or not. So get behind the ACT Party. If there's bits you don't like about them, join them, help to change them. That's really the best thing that you could be doing for New Zealand. And we've seen what happens with the national government with very little ACT Party influence. It's no different to a Labour government. It just inherits what Labour does and builds upon it. And maybe they're a little bit more competent than Labour, but in terms of policy, what's the difference? So hold your nose if you don't like the ACT Party, but absolutely the best prospect that New Zealand's got, I think. If you look at the New Conservative Party, they ain't getting 5%, and they're never going to get a seat. And you're just wasting votes and money getting behind that organisation.
Well, I think you're going to get a bit of pushback from the audience about that. A lot of people dislike the ACT Party. But I think you have a valid point. I think that the conservative movement needs to start to organise and start to think through what's the best way to really get things done. And I definitely am a big supporter of lobbying parties. I guess just to what is your opinion of national the current National Party, and why do you not like it? Why is it so much like Labour, would you say?
Well, have a look at what Nationals did in the last 3 terms of government. They opposed working for families. They opposed interest-free student loans, just as a couple of examples. They maintained deficit spending for 7 years instead of balancing the books after the Christchurch earthquake and the global financial crisis. And then while in opposition, they voted with the government. I think it was at least 50% of the time. I believe it may have been 2/3 of the time that they voted with the government, and ACT was the only vote opposed. And now I guess they're reaping what they sow, because their support base has realised just how impotent they are. Look at what they're trying to do now in terms of the ute tax versus EVs, whereas National voted for these climate change regulations in the last term. So they really have betrayed their core supporter base. And that's why the ACT Party is doing so well now, because its supporter base has moved to ACT.
Interesting. Final question from me before I open up to the audience. Abortion, or I want to talk about abortion. Is abortion a human right, or does a baby have a right to live?
God, this is a tough issue. I've given it a lot of thought, and I think that the regulations that you would put in place which ban abortion would be greater than would violate more freedoms than the regulations you would put in place which allow people to have an abortion. I don't like abortion. I'm personally opposed to it. But like many issues as a libertarian that I don't like, I think on balance, personal freedom is reduced more if you were to ban abortion.
Would it be possible to have a compromise between the two?
Libertarian, yeah. Immigration and abortion absolutely split libertarians. You'll never have them uniting on those two issues.
Is it possible to have a compromise between the two camps? For example, defining when human life starts at perhaps the heartbeat, and then saying from then on it's murdering if you kill this baby?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, ultimately, it's a baby either way, whether it gets a heartbeat or not, because it's going to become a baby. So that's always going to be an extraordinarily difficult issue to find consensus on. And good luck to you if you want to try. I hope you do, but I don't think you ever will. But I would have. I mean, I can't think I would find myself advocating for abortion a week before the baby's due. So yeah, there's absolutely room for compromise there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me here, Stephen, today, and I really appreciate you joining you. So you're my first special guest on this new platform, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and you've got a really great show. I'm going to continue to support your show, and so I'm not sure if you're aware, but I moderate New Zealand Free Media NZ. It's a network of independent publishers where I repost your content, and also there's a link I'll post in the. So just trying to support. Yeah, no problem. I'm just trying to support independent publishers, and I think that we have got a chance to overtake the mainstream media one day in the future. I'm not sure how far on there, but I think it's inevitable, really, that independent publishers have just such a big advantage over the government-funded media that parrot each other. So I just want to thank.
So you know just how much work it is, and I mean, 99% of these attempts really go nowhere. So we need every bit of help we can get, but I think it's also really valuable.
That's also, yeah, for sure, and it is valuable, and just that diversity of information, I think, is great. And so I haven't really done this before, so but what I want to do now, so I've thanked you, so we're done. But if you want to stick around, you can. I'm gonna unmute everyone pretty much, and so people are free to ask you any questions and stuff like that. So so feel free to stick around if you like.
I will jump back in just 30 seconds, and yes, I can spend a bit of time. So thank you. Won't be a sec.
Yeah, no problem. So thank you for joining, everyone. So you're all unmuted. You're welcome to join. So I'm just experimenting with the formats. Really, I had to mute people during the discussion just to keep it one-on-one, as well as the questions that we had, which was great. So thank you, Dave, and PB12 and others for your questions that you brought. And I thought it was a really great addition to the conversation. So feel free to, you're all unmuted now, so feel free to join in if you like. So we do this if you're awesome, yeah. So if you're new to this channel or this platform, so this is New Zealand Free Speech Radio in the New Zealand Free Speech Telegram. We're broadcasting here every Tuesday at 6 p.m. So feel free to join if you like, and try to make things as useful as possible. So so yeah, feel free to comment anyone if anyone wanted to talk about or make a comment on what we've discussed recently with Stephen.
Mr. Berry, what was the stance on firearms rights and the right to defend yourself?
Oh, look, I've always been a huge advocate of the right to bear arms, and I was really pleased that ACT took such a stand on it, because I thought it was another one of those untouchable issues, especially after the mosque shootings. So the fact that ACT actually took such a strong stand on it, and it paid off, I was very pleased about. But personally, as a libertarian, I've always been in favour of the right to bear arms, and I think we should be minimising the laws on it as much as possible, and as long as there's steps in place to try and restrict the supply to those who are mentally ill or have a criminal history. But other than that, I would like as few gun laws as possible.
Yeah, because I'll tell you a story just from my local town here. We got a liquor store guy got, rushed by guys and stuff, and I was at this other liquor store, like just buying some data or something, and I say, hey, you see that thing 2 nights ago? And they're like, oh yeah, the guy got hit, bottle on the head and stuff, and the guy's like, yeah, the Auckland Council won't let us. I've got
Yeah,
a gun, but they won't let me take it to work where I need it. Yeah, and he's but I'd love to protect everyone, but if I get in trouble, then and I was like, well, what if you die? And it was just
yeah.
laughing it
I
off.
mean, I've worked in supermarkets for over 20 years, and about 10,
Yeah,
15 years ago, it was we all got involved in chasing after the shoplifters, and if they hit you, you were allowed to hit them, and it was great fun. But these days, it's quite different. You just let the shoplifters leave the store and upload the camera footage to a website that supermarkets have with the police called Aura, and it's all about not getting involved and just recording and leaving it alone. I haven't worked in a situation like a dairy or a liquor store before, so I don't know if that would be the same. Generally, I would say, look, hand over the money and let insurance take care of it afterwards. But I I also think that if you want to have the ability to protect yourself, then you should absolutely be able to make that choice.
yeah, shit, yeah. I mean, like people aren't just like give me the cash and go. They like want to hit you, so that's the issue. If they're
Yeah,
drunk,
that probably is the case. Yeah, it'll be different from supermarkets in that regard. In supermarkets, you can generally just step back and let them take the shit, and it won't go that badly. But it seems like dairies and liquor stores and things like that, the people involved in theft there want to get violent at the same time, perhaps because it's easier for them to do so.
yeah, I saw this dude run out of a food on a countdown, and he was like, the guard was like, oh, what's in your pocket? What's in your pocket? And then he was like, nothing, nothing. And then he pushed this old. I was in the magazine store, or whatever, and he pushed this old security guard, like 50 to 60, into a like birthday card stand, and these two, a couple of like 15 to 17-year-old kids, like male and female, ran down the stairs and plums are falling out of their pockets. They're like trying to steal plums. Escalate it to like launching someone's like grandfather, like into a
Yeah,
into a
yeah. I mean, it's really worth it for the plums, eh? I mean, I've been thrown into a beer fridge before, and I've been on chases and been in fights with people before.
what's the
I
wildest
mean,
story?
it's all. Oh, there was one time where I had kids running around the store, and they wouldn't stop running around the store, and and of course that's a big issue in a small shop where you've got elderly people shopping. And then the parents saw me telling them off and got furious about it. And then the next day, one of the kids' father had come in and just grabbed me by the throat and threw me into a beer fridge
A,
for
a
making his kid cry. But then there's been other cases
fridge
where
for
I've had shoplifters and they've pushed me, so I've smacked them in the head. So that's fun. But is that really what you want to have happen when you go to work, or would you rather just do your job and then go home safe each day?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
Things have changed for the better, I think.
no,
But yeah, absolutely. If you want to protect yourself at work, I in that situation, yeah, absolutely should be allowed to.
yeah. I work at a place where I work with the public and work with, also like drunk people come in and stuff, and like tell them to leave and such. And it's yeah, it's never gone too sour. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
but
drunks are a worry that could go either way at any time, and you just don't know.
yeah. I feel like I'm the drunk whisperer. Just say things like, "Oh, bro, you're cool, man, but you can't come in. You're drunk. I'm not drunk, bro. You're drunk. You're always drunk. I've never seen this guy sober. Like, how the heck?
Yeah, I had a whole lot of regular drunks, which we had to remove all the time as well. I ended up being like the de facto security guard at one particular store, which is strange because if you look at me, I'm skinny as hell.
Mm. Yeah.
Thanks for your questions, Harry. Yeah, anyone else wanted to comment with Stephen while we've got him here?
Ask a question.
So for everyone else, so I just realized I didn't promote your channel, Stephen. So I just sent the link to Stephen's YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out and subscribe and watch his videos. They're really high quality videos, and I hope that you continue to produce them as well, Stephen. So yeah, I guess we may as well wrap it up.
Mr. Berry on YouTube, and you'll find it.
Yeah, yep. So I guess we may as well wrap it up. I just want to thank you again, Stephen, for joining. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll share a link to the. That's great, and I'll share a link to the recording if you would like it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And, thank you everyone for listening. I've really enjoyed it.
Yo, can I
Awesome.
do an outro? Hold on, I'll just get it.
Outro song. Harry is great. He does impersonations and he does songs as well, and he is lots of fun.
Go for it, man.
Here we go. Can you turn on the guitar? It's tuning the guitar. It looks like. Welcome, Jerry Berry.
Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry. Oh, Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry, Mr. Berry. Oh, Mr. Berry.
It's fantastic. Thank you.
It's better than the Amadeus shit. I don't know what that was about.
Thanks very much, Harry.
Sweet, man.
That was awesome. Perfect way to end it.
Thanks. See you later.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you for joining. So if you want to listen again, we're live every Tuesday at 6 p.m. at t.me/NZ Free Speech Radio. We talked to Stephen Berry today from Mr. Berry Show. So really appreciate everyone joining, and appreciate your song there, Harry, for Stephen. That was really great. It was really accurate, actually. Yeah, you must have been practicing that, I could tell. So yeah, we're going to end it now anyway, and I'll share the re-upload for everyone. So thank you. Bye-bye.